since the Financial Services Committee began the process of reauthorizing the terrorism risk insurance program. It's been 9 months since our committee held a field hearing in New York at which we heard experts, insurers, developers, reinsurers testify about the private market for terrorism insurance, which has not grown enough since 9/11 to sufficiently meet the demand in many of our nation's so-called high-risk areas. It has been over 4 months since we held a subcommittee and a full committee markup, and almost 3 months since the House overwhelmingly approved H.R. 2761, a strong reauthorization that would have extended TRIA for 15 years, provided group life insurance as well as nuclear, chemical, and biological and radiological coverage, and significantly lowered the program's trigger lever. Most importantly of all, and after constructive negotiations and compromise with the minority, the House bill included a recess to address increased capacity shortages following major terrorist attacks, such as those that may occur anywhere in our country. And yet, despite a proactive bipartisan effort in the House, spearheaded by Chairman Frank and Ranking Member Baucus, we find ourselves in the 11th hour with TRIA set to expire at the end of the month. And we're faced with a weak Senate bill that was deliberately sent to us only after we had recessed for Thanksgiving, effectively stalling the negotiation process between the two chambers. The Senate bill, a 7-year reauthorization that only amends the TRIA program by eliminating the distinction between foreign and domestic acts of terrorism, simply does not provide developers, insurers, reinsurers with enough of the stability they need in our free market economy to plan, finance, insure, and build our nation's major development projects. Mr. Speaker, for TRIA to be truly effective in addressing the shortages in the terrorism insurance market, we must recognize that the market is dynamic. The terrorism insurance market behaves much differently in the wake of a terrorist attack than it does before an attack. The reset contained in this compromise bill is identical to the reset provision that was included in the House-passed TRIA extension in September, which I and Mr. Baker of the minority came to a mutually acceptable agreement. Under those terms, which are in this compromise bill, in the event of a terrorism attack with losses of $1 billion or greater, the deductibles for any insurance company that pays out losses due to the event immediately lower to 5%, while the nationwide trigger for any insurer for future events drops to $5 million. Mr. Baker and I also reached agreement on my proposal to enable the Secretary of the Treasury to aggregate the total losses of 2 or more attacks that occur in the same geographic area in the same year, so that if the total insured losses of those events are over $1 billion, the reset mechanism would be triggered. The inclusion of this language is absolutely vital to every high-risk area across the country, and many of us consider this to be the central, most essential, must-be-included aspect of the legislation. My colleagues may recall that the TRIA extension passed by the House in September was subject to PAYGO concerns because the CBO had assessed its cost at roughly $10 billion over 10 years. With this CBO score, some of our friends on the other side of the aisle argued that even though no funds would have been appropriated unless the country was attacked, our bill would have been too much of a burden on the American taxpayer. Not knowing who else to bill for an attack on America, I disagreed with that view, and with the CBO scoring, but I too am committed to a fiscally responsible bill, and I'm pleased to say that my fiscally conservative friends on both sides of the aisle can now vote for this bill without any hesitation, thanks to the inclusion of language from the Senate bill, and more significantly because the reset language, this compromise legislation, has been assessed to a positive CBO score of $200 million. Let me say that again. This compromise bill that we're debating today will result in a net gain of $200 million. Legislation that protects developers and the insurance industry from terrorist attacks and provides taxpayers with a return on their dime is something I believe that we should all support. Mr. Speaker, the next terrorist attack against the United States, like the one on 9/11, is going to damage more than just buildings. We must acknowledge that the structural losses associated with terrorist incidents will be accompanied by the loss of human life. The legislation before the House today recognizes this fact and includes group life insurance coverage because this Congress is concerned not only with the value of buildings, but the people inside of them as well. Our bill lowers the program trigger from that in the Senate bill from $100 million to $50 million. Our lower trigger would prevent smaller insurance companies from being priced out of the terrorism insurance market. And with a greater supply of insurance, we can expect higher degree of stability for large-scale developers all over America. Mr. Speaker, in the absence of a formal conference, which most of us in this body would have preferred, we have taken it upon ourselves to consider this legislation in which we have compromised with the Senate on many of their issues, but holds firm on those provisions that we believe must be included in TRIA: the reset mechanism, group life coverage, and lower triggers. I urge all of our colleagues to support this important, and as the clock strikes 11:59, to place the burden of responsibility back on the broad shoulders of the United States Senate. I yield back the balance.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Alabama.
Mr. Chairman, at this time I yield such time as he may consume to the able gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hensley.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for such time as he may consume.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for